The store fell silent when the cashier softly said, "Sir, your card's declined." Jake froze, staring at the small machine like it had betrayed him. The sound of people shuffling behind him made his chest tighten. His baby's milk bottle was almost empty at home, and this was the last formula tin he could afford. He had already done the math twice before leaving the house, cutting out everything he didn't need. Bread, coffee, even diapers. He just needed the formula. His hands trembled as he whispered, "Can you try again, please?" His voice cracked, desperate. The cashier gave him a sympathetic look and swiped the card again. Another beep. Declined. Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. For a moment, he couldn't even move. He glanced down at the cart where his 6-month-old daughter, Emma, slept peacefully, her tiny hand clutching the corner of her blanket. "It's okay, sweetie," he murmured, forcing a smile through the ache in his chest. "Daddy will fix it." People in line behind him started sighing, tapping their feet, some whispering under their breath. The world felt so loud around him, yet inside everything was quiet. A single dad, holding on to what little pride he had left, trying not to break. He felt his face heat up as he mumbled, "Just a second," pretending to check his wallet, though he knew there was nothing inside but a few coins and an old receipt. He thought about leaving the cart there, walking out, and pretending it didn't matter. But it did. Emma needed that milk. His baby needed him to be strong. Abra the cashier hesitated, her eyes soft. "Maybe you can come back later, sir?" she offered gently. Jake nodded slowly, though he knew later wasn't going to be any different. His next paycheck was a week away, and most of it would go to rent. He could feel tears pressing behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall here, in front of everyone. He reached for the formula tin, ready to put it back on the shelf, when a gentle voice behind him said, "Don't worry. I've got this." Jake turned, startled. A woman stood there, mid-30s, maybe older, with kind eyes that seemed to see right through the walls he had built around his pain. She wore a simple blue sweater and carried just a few items in her basket: bread, fruit, and a carton of milk. Her presence felt calm, grounding. "Ma'am, you don't have to," Jake said quickly, his voice shaking with both embarrassment and gratitude. But she was already reaching into her purse, handing her card to the cashier without hesitation. "It's fine," she said with a warm smile. "Let me do this." The cashier looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. The woman nodded. "Yes, please. Put everything on my card. Free." Jake stood frozen, unsure how to react. He felt his heart thudding in his chest, a mix of relief and disbelief. Why would you do that?" he managed to say. The woman glanced at him, and then at baby Emma, who had just opened her tiny eyes and was looking up with innocence that melted every heart in sight. "Because," the woman said gently, "no parent should have to worry about feeding their child." Jake's lips parted, but no words came out. His mind flashed back to the last few months, losing his job when the company shut down, struggling to find work while taking care of his baby alone, nights when he ate less so Emma could have more. He had stopped asking for help because every time he did, someone looked at him like he was a failure. But this woman didn't look at him that way. Her eyes didn't carry pity, they carried understanding. The cashier started scanning the items again, and the sound of each beep felt like a weight being lifted off Jake's shoulders. The people in line stopped whispering. Some even looked away, ashamed for judging him. The woman turned to Jake and said, "You're doing great, you know." Jake blinked. "What?" She smiled. "You're doing your best, and that's enough." For the first time in a long while, Jake felt seen. Not as the broke single dad. Not as the guy struggling to keep it together, but as a father trying with all his heart. He felt his throat tighten as he whispered, "Thank you. I don't even know your name." "Emily," she replied softly. "And you don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. When you're able, help someone else. That's how kindness keeps going." Jake nodded, his eyes wet now. He looked down at Emma, who smiled up at him like she understood everything. He whispered, "You see that, sweetheart? There's still good people in the world." As the cashier handed him the bag, Jake held it carefully, feeling the warmth of that small act of kindness spread through him. It wasn't just about the baby food, it was about hope. He turned to Emily and said, You have no idea what this means to us. She smiled again, her eyes glistening slightly. Maybe I do, she said. Jake watched as she paid for her own groceries and headed toward the exit. He wanted to say something more, something that could show how deeply grateful he was, but words felt too small. He called out, "Thank you, Emily." She turned back, waved, and said, "Take care of that little one." As she disappeared through the doors, Jake stood there for a moment, holding Emma close. He felt lighter somehow, like the weight of the world wasn't crushing him anymore. He realized that sometimes the smallest acts could carry the biggest meaning. The store around him returned to its usual hum, but for Jake, everything had changed. He carried the groceries to his old car, placing the bags carefully in the back seat next to Emma's car seat. He looked at her tiny face and whispered, "We're gonna be okay, baby. Daddy promises." And for the first time in months, he truly believed it. That evening, as he fed Emma the warm milk, he thought about Emily's words again. Help someone else when you can. He didn't have much, but one day he would. And when that day came, he'd remember this moment. The quiet store, the declined card, the kind stranger who turned a painful memory into a story of hope. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness doesn't just feed a hungry baby. It feeds a weary soul. Jake stammered, "Ma'am, please, you don't have to." But his voice broke before he could finish the sentence. The woman standing before him gave a soft, reassuring smile and said, "I know, but I want to." Her tone was gentle, almost motherly, and it disarmed him completely. In a world that often felt cold and distant, her warmth cut through the noise of the crowded store like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Jake stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do, while the cashier quietly rang up the remaining items. Moments later, the woman placed her card on the counter and said calmly, "Please, just put it all together." The cashier hesitated, looking at Jake for confirmation, but the woman nodded again with quiet conviction. "It's fine. Let's make sure they have everything they need." Jake could only watch in silence as the machine beeped and the transaction went through. The sound that moments ago had filled him with humiliation now carried something else entirely: relief. The woman wasn't just paying for the baby formula. She had covered the entire cart: diapers, wipes, bottles, baby lotion, and even a small pack of fruit puree Jake had picked up, but planned to return when his card failed. He looked at the screen and realized she had just spent more money on him than he'd had in his bank account for months. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Why would you do this for me?" The woman turned to him, her expression soft but her eyes glistening with something deeper, like she understood the pain behind his question. "Because once, someone did it for me," she said quietly. Jake blinked, his breath catching in his throat. There was something in her voice, a heaviness that hinted at a story she wasn't telling. For a moment they both stood there in silence, the noise of the store fading into the background. It felt like time had slowed, like this simple act of kindness connected two strangers in a way that words couldn't describe. Jake finally managed to say, "Thank why?" Though the words felt too small, too weak to express what was happening inside him. He wanted to tell her that she hadn't just bought groceries, she had given him hope, dignity, and a reason to keep going. His eyes welled up, and before he could stop them, tears began rolling down his cheeks. He tried to turn away, embarrassed, but the woman reached out and lightly touched his baby's tiny hand in the shopping cart. The baby's fingers curled around hers, and she smiled softly, her voice filled with warmth. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "When life gives you the chance, help the next person who needs it. That's how we keep kindness alive." Bravery Jake nodded, unable to speak. His throat felt tight, his heart heavy yet light at the same time. The woman finished her own small purchase, then picked up her bag and prepared to leave. But before she walked away, she looked back at him and said, "You're doing great. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." Jake's lips trembled as he whispered, "I won't forget this. Ever." She smiled one last time, waved gently, and walked out into the sunlight, disappearing into the crowd outside. Jake stood there for a long moment, still processing what had just happened. The cashier handed him the bag of groceries with a quiet smile, and even the people who had once looked impatient now seemed humbled. One man muttered softly, "That was something," as he looked down at his own cart. It was like that one small act had changed the entire mood of the store. Jake gathered his things and pushed the cart slowly toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the cool air brushed against his face. He looked around, half expecting to see the woman again, but she was gone. For a moment, he stood outside the store, the sunlight warming his face, and whispered to himself, "Maybe the world isn't as cold as it feels sometimes." He strapped Emma into her car seat, carefully placing the bags beside her. She was smiling, babbling softly. Her. Tiny hands waving in the air, as if she knew something good had just happened. Brew. As Jake drove home, his mind wandered. He thought about how close he'd been to giving up, not just today, but many times before. There were nights when he'd sat in the dark, wondering how he was supposed to raise a baby alone. Since losing his wife during childbirth, every day had been a battle between exhaustion and love, between survival and hope. But then, moments like this reminded him that even when life breaks you down, there are still people out there who will lift you up without asking for anything in return. When he got home, he carefully unpacked the groceries. The formula tin sat on the counter, shining under the kitchen light like something sacred. He prepared Emma's bottle and held her in his arms, feeding her slowly. She looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, and he felt his heart swell. "You're safe, baby girl," he whispered, "because someone kind decided we mattered." Tears filled his eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. He kissed her forehead softly and smiled. "One day, when you're older, I'll tell you about the lady who helped us when Daddy had nothing left." That night, after putting Emma to bed, Jake sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He thought about the woman's words, "Help the next person who needs it." He didn't have much now, but he promised himself that when he did, he'd do exactly that. Maybe he'd pay for someone else's groceries. Maybe he'd help a struggling father find a job. Whatever it was, he'd make sure that the kindness that found him today didn't stop with him. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to turn around. Jake got a job at a local repair shop, and though the hours were long, he felt grateful every day. Each paycheck, he put a few dollars aside in an envelope labeled Kindness Fund. It wasn't much, but it was something. And one day, months later, when he saw a young mother at the grocery store, counting coins at the checkout, his heart recognized the same pain he once carried. Without hesitation, Jake stepped forward and said the same words that had once changed his life. "Don't worry, I've got this." The woman looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. Jake smiled softly, feeling tears sting his eyes as he remembered that day, that stranger, that act of love. It was his turn now. The kindness that once found him was flowing through him, and that's how it was meant to be. Because kindness never really ends, it just keeps finding new hearts to live in. That day at the grocery store, a stranger's compassion didn't just feed a hungry baby. It fed a broken spirit, restored faith, and reminded a single father that even in the hardest times, love and kindness still have the power to change everything.